From the University of Nebraska at Omaha, this is NCITE Insights. I'm your host, Erin Grace. Welcome to NCITE Insights. I'm your host, Erin Grace. Our guest today is Dr. Evan Perkoski. He's an NCITE researcher based at the University of Connecticut. Evan is an associate professor in the UConn Department of Political Science, and he is about to direct a really exciting innovation center, I guess. Evan, you'll have to explain to us a little bit about it. Why don't with that, talk a little bit about what you're going to do, and then we'll get to your research.
Sure. Yes, I'm a professor at the University of Connecticut, and I work on, my focus is how the internal dynamics of armed organizations, how they make decisions, how they recruit, how they finance, how they tactically innovate and why they do so at certain times, how they forge connections and alliances, and how those help organizations. So my main kind of focus is that internal perspective of how they operate. And one of the big things I've worked on over my career is innovation. How do groups innovate their internal dynamics? How do they create new management structures? How do they create new recruitment structures? How do they create new tactics? What are the factors that lead to innovation? And so we're starting a new research hub here at the University of Connecticut that is focused on innovation and security. So not just amongst non-state actors, but thinking about how do innovations, technological and otherwise, influence the types of conflict and the patterns of conflicts we see, both within states and across states, and what are the implications of that?
That's really exciting, and I can't wait to talk to you about your latest grant and that research. But first, let's talk about what you've done for NCITE. Can you describe your project a little bit and some of your recent findings?
Yeah, so my project with NCITE has been really fascinating, and we're looking at how the people within terrorist organizations shapes how they behave. We know that terrorists and other armed groups are really just groups of people, and our intuition is that the people in that group are going to shape how it ultimately behaves. So if you bring people with certain knowledge, certain capabilities, technical expertise, language skills, recruitment skills, whatever it might be, that's going to influence how effective their organization is and how that group ultimately behaves. And this is not a new perspective, right? We've had lots of existing research on how talent spotting by armed organizations, by the IRA and Al-Qaeda, to go and find people who know how to make IEDs has helped contribute to the spread of IED technology across the world. We know that alliances and sharing trainers has done the same thing. And Iran right now is sending trainers to different groups throughout the Middle East to increase their technological capabilities and their attack capabilities. And so we're kind of taking this human capital perspective and applying it to terrorists and saying, all right, who's in the group and how is that linked to how they ultimately behave? And we think this is important not just for understanding, right, who is in a group and who are they recruiting, but if we can find patterns in how the people in a group shapes how it behaves, we can use that knowledge to track membership and anticipate future operational patterns, and based on changes to recruitment, changes to how the group might ultimately behave in the future.
Thank you for that. I remember when I started at NCITE, Dr. Gina Ligon, of course, who's the director and who you know, had done all this ISIS research. And, you know, what her discovery was, of course, is that they were far more organized and bureaucratic and had processes in ways that I think would surprise the average person who just would think of ISIS as a bunch of thugs in the back of a pickup running around with big guns. You know, that in their head is who a terrorist is. You know, it's sort of surprising to learn, like, oh, terrorists, you know, they're keeping Excel spreadsheets, you know, they're keeping receipts, they're acting like a typical organization. And so in your studies of this, like, what have you seen? What are similarities across groups of different ideologies?
Yeah, one of the big similarities we find is that the more people you recruit, the better you are as an organization. Kind of the more widely you can recruit, the more different skills you can get, the more languages you can get, the better better off you are as a terrorist organization. So the groups that recruit most widely tend to be the most lethal, conduct the most attacks. They survive the longest. They forge the most connections. And this is something that we see both in corporations too. The broader you can recruit people, the more technical members you have, the more training you have, that contributes to effective firms in the business sense, but also effective terrorist groups too. And a few other really cool things we find is that we focus really in particular on people who join terrorist groups that have military training in some form. And we know it's a huge issue right now around the world where people in different anti-government groups are trying to seek out these people, these veterans who have military skills and military training. They want it exactly for that knowledge. And we find that getting those people into the organizations makes the groups much more effective. They're more likely to attack harder targets like government and military installations. They tend to be more lethal and conduct more attacks, have more tactical diversity and complexity in conducting coordinated attacks. So all this really fits with exactly what you were saying before, that these are complex entities. They care a lot about their members. They care a lot about management, and they're very particular with who they let into their groups. And when you take recruitment seriously, it can really benefit the organization.
That is such an interesting and not surprising at all fact, right? Like
Yeah.
any organization wants the best and the brightest. You're going
Yep.
to want the most capable, not some dummy off the street who doesn't know how to wire an incendiary device. And
Right.
to that end, I saw one of your takeaways was tracking the engineering and electrical expertise
Yeah.
of terrorist members.
Yeah, so in the current phase of our project, we focus on collecting a bunch of different variables related to who is in a terrorist organization. It's really hard to track recruitment, right? Because recruitment is dynamic, it succeeds and it fails. So we're looking kind of cross-sectionally at groups and saying, all right, who's inside the organization that we can see? And one of the things we looked for are people with advanced education. And we found that having that in your group, once again, makes you much more effective. So compared to groups that only have typically consistent low levels of education, those where you get a mix are more effective, they kill more people, they have higher attack lethalities, they have exhibit more operational complexity, and they're the only group that has a higher chance of a successful operation. So over their lifetime, we calculate, all right, how many attacks did you conduct? How many were successful? So what's that percentage? And they're the only recruitment dynamic that increased that percentage was having technically trained people, which again makes sense from a management perspective. Having capable fighters who know how to create a successful bomb are going to lead to more successful attacks.
Which just seems to logically follow. I am wondering about just recruitment in general, and here we are in March Madness in Omaha. We're calling it March Mavness because for the first time, the University of Nebraska at Omaha, the Mavericks are going to the big dance. They'll play late tonight. Hopefully, they'll win. I have them winning, so we'll see how my pool does. Of course, UConn is old guard there. But there's all this here, and I can just tell you here in Omaha, just the idea that these guys are going is a huge recruiting tool for the university, and they don't even have to really do anything about it. It's just magic, right? And so, how does that work in a terrorism context where you don't have to go actively recruit some engineer? Some event shapes the recruitment effort, and people just flock to you. Did you look at that?
Yeah, so my co-author Alec Warsop and I have a paper coming out where we kind of look at this dynamic and we focus in particular on the intentional recruitment side. So what you're alluding to is the fact that there's both kind of intentional and unintentional recruitment dynamics. The intentional is I'm a group leader, I want people with certain skills, I go out and I find them. I send recruiters to college campuses, I send them to a bunch of different, whatever locations it might be for where it can find particular people. And a great example of this is Aum Shinrikyo. And just last week was the anniversary of their sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway. They paid something like $25,000 to some recruiter who got them a list of recent graduates from some technical university in Australia. So there's a very intentional pathway of going out and finding people, and that's critical when a group knows what they want to achieve and who they need to get there. The other part is that success begets success in every sense. So if you conduct a high profile attack, people are going to flock to you. The problem is, from a terrorist group standpoint, is that people that come to you voluntarily and after a big successful attack might not be the best and brightest. They might not be the most committed. They might be there for the adventure, the notoriety, and the fame that comes with being part of your organization. So this gets to a fundamental trade-off that groups face, which is how do we get people we want, but how do we also get committed people who are going to fight with us and follow orders and not just be here temporarily and undermine our operations. So recruitment is really complex. It's once again just like businesses, where a business will put out have a job opening and people apply voluntarily. They will talent spot and try to find the right CEO for their organization and have recruiters looking for certain types of people. And again, it sounds bad saying, but terrorists, they're kind of just like us. They're just like business firms where they are careful organizations. They're not just these dudes running around fighting haphazardly, but they're really carefully managed. And especially the groups like Al Qaeda and ISIS that bring in millions of dollars, have tens of thousands of fighters, and you have to run those like a Fortune 500 company, basically.
Evan, forgive me that you probably reported this and I have just missed the detail, but on the recruitment pathway and on that idea, so the intentional versus unintentional. The unintentional, they're just running to your door. You don't have to
Yep.
go find them, but there's the cost of trying to train up.
Yep.
So, you have the numbers, but they may not be who you want. But you
Yep.
find who you want. They graduated from X university, but they may not know of your cause. They may not
Yep.
care about your cause. So, what does recruitment look like to get someone like that? You want the expert, but they don't have the commitment or knowledge.
Yeah. So recruitment again is incredibly dynamic, and you might think that the same terrorist group will use the same recruitment logic for every recruit, but it's not the case. Inexperienced younger recruits will get one type of messaging about fighting and adventure and defeating the United States.
Hmm.
Another more experienced recruit might be focused on revenge and pay for their family and trying to recoup some loss that they feel or some sense of national identity, perhaps. And again, we really saw this quite obviously in Iraq with the Islamic State. The Islamic State fighters, who were the youngest, the suicide bombers, the most untrained, the people who flocked there, wanted the adventure, wanted the fame, were sometimes appealed by the ideology and the radicalized rhetoric they were putting out. And the Ba'athist fighters from Saddam Hussein's army, the Chechen fighters, the fighters from other Syrian groups that they really wanted, it was totally different. It was often about pay. It was often about success. It was often about, for the Ba'athists, defeating the US and kind of reclaiming Iraqi national identity. And because of that, those people really didn't get along. And this is another downstream challenge of recruitment that um, not everyone gets along. You have to train people. People who come into your group who have past experience might not assimilate very well. They might think they know better than you. So one of the cool things we find in our project is in a separate project that Alec Warsop and I have that's coming out soon, security studies, is that we think that there are these huge benefits to people like experienced fighters, but there are really downsides to recruiting every different type of membership or person too. So experienced fighters might have a certain type of training that maybe isn't helpful to what you actually want to do as a terrorist group. Recruiting people who have advanced education might not get along with those who think they know better and who don't have the technical expertise and are trying to shape the organization. So there are pros and cons to everyone. And it's a really, once again, dynamic, tricky process.
Very, very interesting. I'm thinking about the dynamic time. I like that you keep using that word because it's really the best word to capture this moment that we're in now, where there's just a lot of uncertainty in a lot of areas, financial, political, otherwise. What does that do in a terrorism recruitment context? Um,
Usually, uncertainty and change is a boon to terrorist organizations. Whenever things change, there are winners and losers, whether it's economics, politics, demographics, whatever it is. Some people are losing out or feel like they're losing out and probably are temporarily. And any sort of grievance can be used to recruit people. People appeal and care about different things, whether it's just money, whether it's adventure, whether it's an actual grievance. And we have this idea that terrorists like Al Qaeda and the Islamic State, and I kind of alluded to this before, have a consistent message. But it's really not the case. Some are more religious than others. Some are more motivated by revenge than others. Some are more motivated by pay than others. So it's very inconsistent in a terrorist group what attracts people to the organization. And for many people, that uncertainty can be kind of what they're looking for. And this relates to another perspective on terrorist groups that a lot of people argue, and especially people at NCITE who do great work on kind of the organizational dynamics and organizational perspective of terrorism, that some people are just drawn to a terrorist group because it provides an opportunity to belong somewhere. It gives you that built-in solidarity and cohesion. It gives you something to do if you lost your job and you don't have friends or don't have a community. And so, kind of to your point about uncertainty and change and this dynamic nature of what we're experiencing right now, having a group where you feel like you belong that gives you a solid foundation is also just really appealing to some people.
Right, certainty in a time of uncertainty, right? We're in the gray, but boy, do I need some black and white here. And
Exactly.
a terrorist group can provide that, right? I mean, because of an ideology that would be pretty firm, I guess. Uh,
Yep.
so now let's just throw a monkey wrench into all of this tech and AI. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about this grant you got and how you're going to apply the same sort of expertise to innovation and AI.
Yeah. So, as with every kind of facet of life nowadays, it seems artificial intelligence is coming to terrorist groups too. Um, Obviously, they're not going to be immune to it. And just like with any other change in society, technological change in particular, they will find a way to make the use of it. Whether it's online banking, whether it's the internet, whether it's WhatsApp and social media, they will find a way to take something that we have and repurpose it to their advantage.
Yes.
And AI is going to be no different. We've already seen examples of terrorists and other types of organizations using artificial intelligence. We've seen Hamas putting out AI created images that kind of support their cause and show atrocities and that they're using to recruit more people and to kind of get more support for their cause. Al Qaeda is training recruiters on using AI chatbots. Al Qaeda has also used AI to doctor clips of Family Guy to recruit and kind of entertain people and draw them into their organization. And they put that out on social media. So anything they can do that will be benefited by AI, they will ultimately find a way to use it for themselves. But I think the tricky thing is that we are in such a nascent space of the development of artificial intelligence that we're seeing this big arms race now between AI firms in the US and China and elsewhere, but it really is in its infancy. And this is especially true for how terrorists are using it. They're just getting their feet wet. So we're seeing them employ it in some of its most basic forms, doctoring images, doctoring clips, simple chatbots that can help them communicate across languages. But my worry is that AI will be employed for every single aspect of a terrorist organization. We can think about operations. They're going to use AI. They're going to feed it data on terrorist attacks and say, help me design a more effective operational pattern, one that kills more people and has a higher success rate. And here's what we're trying to achieve. They're going to help manage their recruits and train their recruits potentially. AI can provide oversight into plans, into movements, into finances. AI can help them design new ways of raising funds, of moving funds to evade potentially government sources. AI can help them write political messaging, political discourse, and write the materials they need to train and indoctrinate new recruits. So if you can think of kind of any critical task that a terrorist has to do, you can almost imagine a way that AI can be useful. But it's very forward looking. And those sorts of things from a social science standpoint are very hard to study because there's no data, there's no history there that we can really evaluate. So what I'm trying to do in this project with Schmidt Futures, and they've very generously funded on this project, is to conduct a survey of experts who study terrorism and experts who are really computer scientists and in the AI world. And I want to get a sense of what's going to happen, when, and kind of what we should expect. And I think that's the kind of the best way we can get a sense of what's ready to come. So I'm planning to do this big survey of these renowned experts and say, how do you think terrorists might use AI? What's the timeline? How do they break the guardrails that we currently have on AI platforms? When do we think AI might be so democratized and spread around that the guardrails won't really matter? Um, and so kind of trying to get a sense of that. And then with that new understanding, I'm planning to do a bunch of case studies of how past technologies and changes have shaped terrorist operations too, to say, okay, here's what we think about AI. Here's what's happened when the internet was developed and really spread around the world. And let's see what we can learn from that and devise some policy implications.
I think that's going to be really fascinating. I was just thinking about that question, like, yeah, what did they do when cell phones came out, right?
Right. Made them much more effective. They could communicate, they could disperse more, they could share information on where, counterinsurgent forces were, and it's going to be just as revolutionary, I think.
I mean, one of the questions I have just sort of thinking this through is just the normalization of it all. So, when you think about, crazies in the hills, like using a Xerox machine to, share some wackadoodle theories that we would call terrorism, and the easy spread of it now through the internet across so many means makes to me there's like a mainstreaming effect that happens, right? This isn't just something I can instantly cast aside as some conspiracy theory or some um, far-fetched or some terrorist idea. This
Yeah.
now is something that's kind of normal. I think we all kind of experience that to some degree with
Yeah.
an immersive media environment. I don't know if I have a question there, Evan, about that, but
No, no, it's fascinating. You're getting to this point where truth is being contested, right? And you can say anything, and some people will believe it because the internet has just connected so many disparate people. And I kind of thinking about your point, like there might have been a small group in every community that previously, or a few people, right, who were drawn to conspiracy theories. But now with the internet, those small groups of people are now connected and can be a much larger group. And so we're in a weird environment about truth, about information, the spread of it, and how people are really looking for things to validate how they kind of already believe, which is not a great place to be in.
so what is your time frame for this project?
I'm hoping to field, I will field, will be more definitive. I'll field a survey in the fall this year. I'm going to design it over the summer. And then in the spring, I will be analyzing and writing policy briefs that kind of use the survey results and look back at historical technological changes to say, think about what we should expect from AI. So hopefully by a year from this coming fall, all those reports will be out.
I'm really excited to think about what that will hold, and I'm kind of you have to be kind of excited to just think of the dynamism involved in your whole query here,
Yeah.
right? What are political scientists going to tell you, and what are the tech experts going to tell you, um, and where they
Yeah,
marry up on
I'm
that?
excited for that because there's just once again so much reporting, so much hearsay about AI, and it's hard to know how the experts think about it. And I think that itself will be illuminating. What do computer scientists think about? Sure, they're not terrorism experts, but they have seen the news, they know what these groups are, they know somewhat about how they behave. And what are they thinking? And how does it differ maybe from terrorism experts, and from the general public's point of view?
It'll be interesting too what the bugs are in existing AI. I'm thinking about a recent road trip I took, and ChatGPT told me it would be 9 hours and really, or 6 hours, and really it was nine. I mean, I had to do the old fashioned way of like, how long is this drive anyway? And like, oh no, we're not going there. It's too long. So it was interesting to me that I was going to go right off what ChatGPT told me it was wrong. And this was not a complicated question. It was, how long from here to here.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's getting better, right? I mean, ChatGPT, we're on what? I don't know what model we're on, basically. Grok is now out on X. You have Chinese platforms too that are just as efficient, it seems, or more efficient maybe than some of the American systems. And if these things are growing at some of the almost exponential pace that they seem to be, like we've only really had AI out for a year, 2 years really, where it's been generally available. And the growth of that is just really hard to understand. Like I don't know where it's going to go, which is kind of terrifying.
Evan, talk about this. I think when talking to you, I think of Austin Doctor here at NCITE, who, like you, is a trained political scientist, and like you, is marrying that with tech. He's looking at how terrorist groups might use geospatial technologies to conduct attacks. And so, are you seeing more of an interdisciplinary blend when you look at the social science and the technological science in this time we're in?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we are. I think a lot of the best research I've seen on political science blend information from the fields of business, from the fields of psychology and sociology. And for some of the things we're studying nowadays, you just need deep technical expertise in GIS, in information systems, in database systems, in artificial intelligence. And it's wild to think that we would have thought that a single person could do all those things before, or like in one field siloed, you could answer all those questions. Um, and a lot of researchers are using AI too, and AI is not great at citations and has a bunch of weaknesses when it comes to academia, but it can help kind of bridge some of those gaps and help you find research. And so, some of the things that are really hurting us from a national security standpoint are maybe helping researchers make some progress too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Let me ask you this. What you have, so you're going to do this survey, and a year from now, I get to read something that you're going to, publish on this. So I'm going to have to wait a year, Evan, because you're not a chat GPT model. You're not going to spit it out. You're going to do the actual science here. But what's your theory?
Yeah, so this project, I would say, is not super theoretical, right?
Okay.
This project is trying to be taking stock of what we think is possible on what timeline and what do the experts say compared to what is all the noise that kind of commentators are saying. And to be honest, that's a tricky thing to do as a political scientist because we're trained to find a puzzle, come up with a theory that explains that puzzle, test it, and be falsifiable and bring history and evidence to bear on kind of testing a question. And to be honest, a project like this won't get me a top publication. It'll get me some cool research briefs. It'll get me some really great audiences. And I feel like I'll be having an impact and learning a lot. But it's not the thing that's rewarded typically in political science. So for me, this is something that really this gets to academia, but something I felt much more comfortable doing post tenure because I know there won't be a very clear output from it. It'll be research briefs that are not peer reviewed, that don't sit as strongly in my file as some other sorts of outputs and publications. Um, but if I had to boil it down, the biggest kind of theory I have is that we've been focused so much on generative AI, images, the text part of it, but we have been myopic to how broadly AI can influence terrorist organizations. And I hope my goal, and I hope the theory bears out, that we're going to find that, in fact, terrorists could use this to support every single piece of what they're doing. And we have to be prepared both as people who are creating AI systems and thinking about the guardrails and thinking about the national security controls we put on these systems, and as counterterrorism experts and practitioners to be prepared for what might happen when these things are inevitably broken. Because there's kind of no technology in history that has been limited to the people who really developed it. Even if we think about nuclear weapons, the US has been unable to prevent a number of states, Iran, North Korea, and others, from getting nuclear weapons. And that was a whole lot more dangerous than artificial intelligence. And one of the things we find throughout history is that weaker actors love to take advantage of new technologies because it's the big states, the big actors who are the most inflexible and the most resistant to change. And when you see some technological change, it's the smaller, more flexible, more nimble actors who can take that, employ it, use it to their advantage, and get a temporary advantage over those bigger states who aren't as flexible. And we see that once again, how North Korea, Iran, Pakistan, Iraq, how these countries have operated strategically over decades. And terrorists are no different. They're just as flexible. They're smaller, so even more flexible in some cases. And they're going to take the things that we develop in kind of more advanced societies and more government funding and use that as best they can when it becomes available.
Boy, that is such a great point about how hard it is to turn the battleship around, right?
Yeah.
With that. And so our viewing, listening audience can't see Ben Badafarano here. He's my colleague, and he sets this all up. But he has a very good question, and I'd be remiss not to ask it. He talks about violent non-state actors being maybe weighed down by their population size. Do you predict that I mean, it's got to have an effect on recruitment, right? You might not need that electrician. You might not need as many people if you have, the machinery, the ones and zeros doing it for you.
That's a great point. So could AI reduce the need for certain technical training and expertise in an organization? I would say on the one hand, yes, probably some of that is likely. We've seen the internet disseminate really critical information, training manuals and so on, that historically you needed a person or actual paper to get to an organization to give them some new capabilities. Um, but AI can give you that capability without having the human component to it. So it definitely is true. On the other hand, some of these things are still too complex, even if you have the information. If AI told me how to create an IED, I wouldn't go anywhere near it, right? I'd still want someone who knows and has technical electrical expertise to take the information they gain and the new design insights and maybe do that on their own.
You're not going to just
So
count on a YouTube video, Evan, to make a bomb.
The times I've done much simpler things to use YouTube videos as reference have usually not turned out well for me. So I would not do something that could quite literally blow up in my face. And terrorists don't like to lose members because they train them. They're hard to find, and especially the ones who've been there a long time and have these advanced educations and stuff. So, they might stick to the old-fashioned methods, at least for some of them.
So to take it to just bring this conversation back to what we originally started talking about, which is recruitment. AI, we know, like any technology, is going to have an impact, and you'll tell us more precisely what that will be in a year or so on terrorism. But maybe it's not likely to change their recruitment needs, right? They're still going to need to have numbers and still going to need to have experts.
Yeah, terrorism is still a physical thing, right? Terrorists still function by coercion, by creating fear, and you still need people on the ground to do that. So there will always be that human element to terrorism. Now, it's not to say that we shouldn't be as concerned about cyber actors and cyber crime and kind of malevolent non-state groups on the internet. They can do lots of bad things too. When it comes to terrorism and the implementation of violence, you're still going to need the people there to create that force.
Sounds good. Well, Dr. Evan Perkowski, it has been a fascinating, I guess, half hour to spend with you today. We could talk all day long, but we're trying to get these podcasts up and out and build our audience. So we're really grateful that you gave us your time today, because we have a lot more to discuss and want to have you back when we can talk about what your survey is showing. So thank you so much.
That was great. Thank you for having me. And if anyone listening has any insight or wants to collaborate or is interested in this, please reach out to me too.
Will do. Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
This series is produced by Ben Badafarano, Erin Grace, Scott Jordan, and Blake Ersch. Thank you for joining us for another episode of NCITE Insights. The National Counterterrorism, Innovation, Technology, and Education Center, or NCITE, is an academic center of excellence for the Department of Homeland Security. Looking to find out more? Check out our website at ncite.unomaha.edu or email us at ncite@unomaha.edu.